Generous, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just to sort of quickly wrap up my my comments. Maybe just actually summarize quickly what this motion is about for those who are just tuning in. And I know we have some different members and were here last time. So Conservatives have a deep fundamental concern with many aspects of the way the government has approached the opioid crisis. But regardless of your views on that, I think it's legitimate and something we can all agree on to ask for critical information about the contracts associated with that program. What we know about the history of the opioid crisis is that Purdue Pharma developed an opioid product which they over-promoted with lies and misinformation, and that caused the opioid crisis in the first place. And now we have Purdue Pharma and other companies that are offering dangerous drugs that the government is buying and giving away, supposedly as a solution to this problem. So Conservatives are saying that we need to get to the bottom of the relationships that exist between corporations and government, what kind of contracts exist, and how are Purdue Pharma and other companies that are making these products profiting? What is the structure of these agreements? Is there indemnification protecting these companies from legal liability? These are all questions that I think it's in the public interest for us to know. So, out of this concern, Conservatives have put forward this important motion to get the contracts. I know there's been some informal discussion in between, and if there are reasonable amendments, of course we'd be happy to see those, because the principle here is that we need to see the contracts that the government of Canada has signed with these companies. It's important for accountability and for protecting the public. We know the kinds of practices that these companies have engaged in the past, and we need to get to the bottom of what kinds of practices and relationships exist in the present. Sorry, and just before I conclude, I wanted to note we have the letter that came in from Dr. Summers with some additional information on that, and I was hoping we might be able to invite Dr. Summers to share a bit based on his experience.
I realize it came out late. Did everyone see the letter? Maybe everyone just take a look. It came out probably 2 hours ago, just 3 hours ago, early afternoon. Somebody who wants to, I think, appear and talk about some of the issues that's professor from SFU. So take a look, and maybe it's something we can bring him here on. But go ahead, Mr. Generous.
Okay, are we able to invite him to? Just because there's
are we fine with that?
I'm sorry, I'm just not understanding under what context. For which
study? Just on this issue.
Which study?
On the motion that's before us right now.
Well, I think we should probably, I imagine that the proper order of business is for us to discuss the motion, vote on it, and if there is a study, maybe afterwards talk about the witnesses. I think we're putting the proverbial horse before the cart.
I'll just note here, maybe have a look at the letter. In the meantime, Dr. Summers has some information I think would be of interest to all members about some of the lobbying and the relationships associated with these.
Thanks. Let me just interrupt you. Maybe just take a look at the letter. It did come out about 3 hours ago.
Sure,
I can ask the clerk to resend it, but take a look over the next bit. We can maybe look at that. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Jones, go ahead.
I'll wrap up my comments there, and we can come back to these points. As I say, as a matter of accountability, accounting to Canadians, what is happening and what has happened, what is happening in the present in terms of the relationships between government and these pharmaceutical companies that are profiting through the sale to the government of these dangerous drugs. I think the public has a right to see these contracts, and hopefully we'll be able to get to a resolution on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Next, I have Mr. Ellis. Welcome. We'll go.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's good to be back. J'ai déjà parlé avec ma
I've already spoken with my colleague from the block, and I would like to thank her once again for making this change with her hair.
That being said, sitting on HESA, certainly in my mind, as Mr. Johari knows very well, contracts are not the place for HESA. They don't belong there. They belong at OGO. And I'll certainly start my remarks by reminding folks here of the mandate of OGO. That pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, the committee's mandate primarily includes the study of the effectiveness of government operation, the expenditure budgets of central departments and agency, the format and content of all estimate documents, cross-departmental mandates, including programs delivered by more than one department or agency, new information and communication technologies adopted by the government, and statutory programs, tax expenditures, loan guarantees, contingency funds, and private foundations deriving the majority of their funding from the Government of Canada. The committee is specifically mandated to examine and conduct studies related to the following organization. It goes on to list a bunch of organizations. So that being said, that would be a significant departure from what we have ever done at Health Committee in the past, and certainly having looked through a multitude of documents over many years, I would suggest that that's not something that happens at Health Committee. That being said, Chair, I can't underscore the necessity for this study to be undertaken any more than to go back and look at the history of OxyContin and Purdue Pharma. Certainly in my past life, I was part of an interdisciplinary team that treated chronic pain, which we started that, I believe it was in the early 2000s. So we have been intimately aware on that team with the ravages of the use of opioids in attempting to treat chronic or persistent pain. I would also suggest that when anybody here, if you were to examine the story of Purdue and OxyContin, and there's lots of interesting movies out there that may or may not be true. But that being said, we do know that the parent company, Purdue Pharma, and the Sackler family were successfully sued for $6 billion to pay for the ravages of opioid misuse. And we also know that there was significant junk science that was done to allow the continued prescribing of opioids in an inappropriate manner, even after the good science was well aware of the fact that wasn't going to work. And we also know that there was that documents were difficult to find. I won't say hidden, but there was also much misinformation and disinformation, and that became a significant cause for concern. You know, there was a point of time in this country when the treatment of chronic or persistent pain, that part of the mantra was that more and more opioids should be given until the pain is gone, which I would suggest that anybody around the table with any common sense would be able to understand that that's unlikely to happen. So that being said, I think as we've moved forward through this and begin to understand that treatment of opioid use disorders is an incredibly difficult topic and multifaceted, I would suggest that given the sordid history of what has happened with the prescription of OxyContin in the past, and oddly enough, Dilaudid or hydromorphone is also made by Purdue Pharma. So I think that bears, people here need to bear that in mind as well. I would also suggest, Chair, that when you look at some of the testimony which my colleagues have described, which we have heard at the Health Committee, I think one physician who testified there put it very eloquently when he said that opioid use disorder is not a lack of opioids. It's not like iron deficiency where you need to get more iron and then you will be fine. I would suggest that this is much more complicated than that, and that is what our mandate at the Health Committee is to study. And I would suggest that the mandate here is to begin to uncover those contracts to see if there is any nefarious intent or suspicious benefit that any actors, they being state or potentially a drug company, benefited from the policies that have been put forward, including decriminalization, which would most significantly be affected. And we've seen in the experiment in British Columbia, we have seen a reversal of that particular program. And we also know that with the its cousin program, I'll use that terminology, of so-called safe supply, we do know that there has been significant diversion of hydromorphone in particular, or Dilaudid as it's also known, or once again made by Purdue Pharma, that we know that that medication has been diverted. We also know and have concern about the potential nefarious intent of not calling for the precursor ban of chemicals to make fentanyl in this country. So I hope that allows committee members here at OGO to understand what our mandate at Health Committee is, what we have been studying, and what we have uncovered thus far, but to realize that this is a departure of what would have historically been studied at Health Committee, and it is certainly well within the mandate of government operations to adopt this well thought out motion in front of committee and to bring witnesses to study that. And with that, Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc Ellis. Mrs. Goodrich, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's lovely to be back here at the glorious OGO. Yes, so I am a regular member of the Health Committee, and so I have had an opportunity to sit through the multitude of meetings that we have had looking at the opioid epidemic. But what we have here in the motion from my colleague Garnet Jennis is actually substantially different than what we've been studying at the Health Committee. This is about looking at the contracts and trying to get to the bottom of where the money came from. And this is precisely why I believe that it is critical that we have it at OGO rather than at the Health Committee, because this is about looking at this. And I understand a few hours ago that the chair and everyone on this committee did receive a letter from a doctor, and his name is Dr. Julian Summers, and he's a distinguished professor who has been quite vocal when it comes to addiction and addiction medicine. And in his letter, he talks about the fact that he is a clinician and researcher in the field of addiction, and he has led a number of different federally funded initiatives specifically designed to reduce addictions and related harms. And so when he saw that our motion was on record at the OGO committee, he took it upon himself to write in to ask to present. And earlier this week, he actually was part of he did a podcast. And in the podcast, he was talking at one point during the podcast about some of the very concerning pieces that were coming out of British Columbia, specifically related to some of the top public health officers that were the ones that were making decisions as to whether we would have, whether they would go forward with so-called safe supply in British Columbia, that created companies that then stood to profit and are providing safe supply in British Columbia. And so effectively the very same doctors that were making the policy decisions as to whether they should or shouldn't go forward with a particular policy were in turn had companies involved to do this. And so I really do think it is critical upon us that we not only go forward with this study from my colleague, but have Dr. Summers come testify to committee to give a little bit more breadth of the allegations he made in the podcast from earlier this week. So I guess I'm going to see if perhaps we could have some conversation about, first, having a vote on the notice of motion from MP Janice to get to the bottom of it, look at the contracts. This truly is the best committee when it comes to looking at the specifics and the dollars and cents of it, because we do know that this is government money that has gone towards these programs. We do know, and perhaps Liberal members can raise their eyebrows and everything else, but we do know that the program that was called Safe Supply is effectively governments that have decided to give prescription hydromorphone and Dilaudid, specifically in many cases it is Dilaudid, which is the Purdue brand name of hydromorphone, which is a synthetic opiate that is the equivalent to being stronger than heroin, to people that are struggling with addiction, and that is all paid for by taxpayers. And we need to know who's paying, how much is being paid, and who is getting rich off of this. Because at the end of the day, if someone is in fact profiting off of this, that is absolutely an issue. And if it's not happening, there shouldn't be any fear from any member around this table about getting to the bottom of this. So with that, I would hope that we can get to a vote.